Hello, everyone. I'm Edna Johnston, and I'm going to be your teacher for the intermediate ASL class. Very much looking forward to that. This is just a brief outline to give you an idea of what you can expect for the next 4 weeks. It will go very fast, each class being about an hour and a half in length. So the first week, we will focus on introductions. I think it's important to know who the audience is. We'll talk a little bit about fingerspelling and how that applies to introductions. We'll also talk about states, specifically the ones that you all are coming to us from, and how that relates back to fingerspelling. And we will look at 2- and 3-letter lexicalized fingerspelling as well. There's other categories of fingerspelling that we will also touch on: careful fingerspelling used for introductions or the introduction of new concepts, and then rapid fingerspelling for content that has already been introduced, and then lastly, as I mentioned, lexicalized fingerspelling. And we'll also talk about how fingerspelling relates to literacy for deaf children. We'll talk about cities in America, specifically the ones that you're coming from. For example, in Georgia, if it's Atlanta, some of the larger metropolitan cities sometimes have a sign. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the family tree, family vocabulary, as well as the family tree, and how important that is in particular for deaf children who oftentimes are cut off from that information due to communication barriers, and they don't know their lineage. For example, they might know that a certain member of their family is their cousin, but they might not know from whose side that cousin comes from. We'll also talk about how to negotiate with your children and how syntax relates to that. For example, my son being the master negotiator, wanting sweet frog ice cream, and the fact that if he wants that, he needs to eat his spaghetti for dinner, those types of things. And we'll talk a little bit about resources as well. And that pretty much encapsulates week 1. For week 2, the focus is going to be more on numbers, but numbers in context specifically. We focus on very specific categories that we do a deeper dive in: categories of age, time concepts, money, and then time signs as it relates to tense, such as yesterday, tomorrow. And we're also going to touch on how the different generations and the different age variations are coming up when it comes to time concepts. For example, how older people signed 2 days ago versus how younger people sign it, or 2 days from now, which is very interesting. We'll also talk about things like how to sign last week or next year. We'll talk about dates. We'll talk about addresses. And we will go back to the family signs from week 1 and apply the grammatical concept of listing to that, which is important. So that's week 2. For week 3, what you can expect is focus on home vocabulary, such as food, feelings and emotions, likes and dislikes, the concept of illness and what to do in those cases. For example, how to convey the concept of making a doctor's appointment. So the context and the content from weeks 1 and 2, we're going to apply to week 3 in a very functional sense. We're also going to talk about temporal aspects. For example, whether something lasts for a brief amount of time versus all day, whether something's for a short period versus a long period, the concepts of an acute illness versus a chronic illness. We're also going to look at calendar dates, events, maybe events that your family attends, like church or parties. For example, hosting a football or Super Bowl party, and what time that takes place, and how to explain those concepts for the purposes of making plans. Maybe getting together for play dates and things like that. So that'll be week 3, heavy focus on home vocabulary and functionality. And then the last week, we basically put it all together, everything from the first 3 weeks. Now, we are very fluid in terms of our curriculum. I follow the class, the demographics of the class. Sometimes we have professionals such as interpreters. Sometimes we have teachers of the deaf. Sometimes it's a refresher for the folks in the class. Predominantly, we cater to families with deaf children, but I like to tailor the class to the needs of who I have in front of me and have fun as well. So very much looking forward to working with everybody.